This is Invested in Climate with Jason Rissman. I see climate as the world's biggest, most diverse, most important movement in human history. Millions of people dedicate themselves every day to protecting the planet. This podcast shares conversations with advocates, entrepreneurs, investors, policy experts, and anyone else that can push our thinking about what's possible and what needs to happen to address climate change. If you have ideas for episodes or feedback, get in touch on LinkedIn. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. I'm currently building a new venture. It's related to storytelling and how we engage all sorts of folks in meaningful climate action. If you have expertise in this area, big ideas, or examples of something that's really working, get in touch. Thanks for listening and for doing whatever it is you're doing to support climate progress. Okay, let's get started.
We have to have two things in our head at the same time. We have to leave the door open for continued climate progress with folks who have not voted with us in the past and mostly have never voted with us in the past. Like, let's just be real about the folks who won on Tuesday. A lot of folks that we're tracking have 0% climate scores. And the second piece is we also have to be clear-eyed about the history here and where we have power to continue building clean energy jobs and solving climate change across the country.
Hi, folks. There are many reasons to believe the re-election of Donald Trump will be a major setback to climate progress. His previous record, his recent campaign, his ties to the fossil fuel industry, his perpetuation of misinformation like the strange idea that wind turbines kill whales, all suggest we're in for a radical reversal of America's climate commitment. I've had many conversations with climate leaders since the election, and a different narrative beyond this obvious fear is becoming clear. Climate change doesn't care who is president. Its impacts will be impossible to ignore. Business leadership and global competitiveness are now inextricably linked to navigating the climate transition, and a robust ecosystem of influential actors, domestically and abroad, make a complete abandonment of climate action truly unlikely. Today, I'm joined by two people that bring policy expertise at the federal, state, and local level. Zack Friedman is the Senior Director of Federal Policy at CERES, a nonprofit organization that works alongside investors and companies to advocate for sustainability. And Caroline Spears, founder of Climate Cabinet, an organization that helps local candidates become successful climate champions. I found this conversation to be full of nuance and actually more uplifting than I really expected. Our new reality is sobering, and there's no denying we face new challenges. There is hope, however, and it comes with the fortitude and savvy people like Zack and Caroline have already been demonstrating. This savvy will require telling different stories about climate, about the undeniable business case, and the power of all of us who stay invested. Lots to learn and think about in this one. Here we go. Zack and Caroline, welcome to Invested in Climate. Thank you so much for joining here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jason.
So we are here to talk about the re-election of Donald Trump alongside a Republican Senate and very likely a Republican-controlled House. Before we get there, let's set the context and understand the perspectives you're both bringing. Zack, Caroline, let's hear a bit about the organizations where you work and the roles that you play when it comes to the intersection of climate and policy. Caroline, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about Climate Cabinet and what you all do.
My name's Caroline Spears. I run Climate Cabinet. We help candidates run, win, and legislate on the climate crisis. And I'm excited to be here today to talk about over 50 candidates that won on Tuesday and what that means for climate progress going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you. Zack, over to you.
Yeah, I am Senior Director of Federal Policy at CERES. CERES is a nonprofit working with the world's leading companies and investors to drive sustainability in the bottom line. And my role is to mobilize the business voice to advocate for smart federal policy that strengthens the economy, creates good-paying jobs, reduce costs and emissions, and strengthens competitiveness and security.
Great. Thank you, Zack. Thank you, Caroline. How are you both doing? A long week. It's a couple days after the election results. You getting some sleep? Are you hanging in there?
Oh man, I would say I'm getting some sleep, not as much as I'd want to necessarily, but this is how we planned election night for the last few months. We planned for every scenario, we thought through the options, and I think I always knew this week would not be full of rest. I think that continues over the next few weeks as we parse through what happened and figure out exactly what this means for climate. Our job is to chart a pathway forward and a pathway through, and that's what we're here to do.
What about you, Zach? Hanging in there?
Yeah, hanging in there. Likewise, it's been a long week, but fortunately, I have a great team and a great organization with great partners. And similarly, I'd say we've been preparing for the past year plus and just building bipartisan support for federal clean energy incentives, which, I'm looking forward to talk more about here today.
Well, I hope you both find some ways to recharge. Thanks for being here. You bring expertise across the federal, state, and local levels, which makes for a really complete conversation. Let's start at the federal level. Zack, the United States has just elected someone who, in the past, not only has called climate change a hoax, but has forced federal agencies to remove mention of climate change from their agendas, research, and policy. In his recent campaign, he transparently asked for $1 billion from oil companies for his campaign and promised to trash Biden administration policies on electric vehicles and renewable energy. He has promised to dismantle the Inflation Reduction Act, roll back regulations like those on methane and coal, and to accelerate fossil fuel extraction. It's expected that, like in his previous term, he'll suppress and censor climate science and that he'll again exit the Paris Agreement. Do you expect the new administration to follow through with the rhetoric we've been hearing, which would add up to really an unprecedented setback for climate progress?
On the campaign trail, a lot has been said, but also we've been building bipartisan support for continuing the private sector investment boom in clean energy, because this is achieving everyone's goals. This is not red or blue, but this is red, white, and blue, because we're seeing billions of dollars of private sector investment in communities across the country that are bringing back jobs, strengthening American manufacturing, reducing costs for consumers and businesses. And that's really what we need to achieve all of our goals.
Zack, he's coming in with what he believes to be a really strong mandate. He will have the support of Congress and the courts, and ultimately, he has tremendous power. And he will seemingly prioritize doing what he believes is good for business. How do you think that'll influence what the new administration actually does?
We've been mobilizing our businesses to engage on both sides of the aisle on Capitol Hill, just to talk about all of the great investment that's happening on the ground in states. Been to Dalton, Georgia, and Cartersville, Georgia, and Northwest Georgia. Q-Cells has solar manufacturing. Lucid Motors in Arizona has EV manufacturing. Wholesome in Morgan, Utah has green cement manufacturing. All this in private sector investment is happening in states across the country, many red states, and there's been bipartisan support for continuing these federal clean energy incentives. This summer, 18 Republicans signed a letter to the House Republicans signed a letter to the Speaker in support of continuing these tax credits, because really business needs certainty and stability to continue investing. We've just seen so much investment, especially in communities that have been neglected for decades. And this is really strengthening the American economy, our competitiveness, our supply chains, reducing our reliance on foreign adversaries like China, and reducing costs for businesses and consumers. So we are going to continue working to build bipartisan support to ensure that these really smart incentives and investments can continue.
Zack, what about the EPA? The previous Trump administration rolled back over 100 environmental regulations and attempted to slash the EPA's budget. What do you expect will happen to the EPA? Is there a reason to hope that the damage to the EPA won't be as bad as one could possibly fear?
On the EPA side, last year we did a study looking back over decades, 3 or 4 decades of EPA rulemaking history, where oftentimes industry will say that EPA rules are too ambitious, they're not feasible, they're going to impose too much cost on businesses and consumers. Well, each time EPA has done this under the Clean Air Act, under their solid legal authority under the Clean Air Act, business has actually been able to achieve those ambitious standards faster and more cost effectively than even the EPA predicted. So we think that because EPA has under administrative procedure, they have a public process and public engagement where they take stakeholder comments, including industry, and where they consider those comments. So an industry has been supportive of the vehicle standards, of power plant standards that EPA released earlier this year. We think there's a strong case for continuing the policy and regulatory certainty that investors and businesses need to continue driving investment into American, affordable, reliable, abundant, clean energy.
Zack, what about the implications internationally? There's the expectation, or at least there's been the campaign promise to leave the Paris Agreement once again. What implications will that have internationally as countries see that America's commitment to climate progress is not steady?
Hopefully, all of these investments in this policy environment continues, whether that's at the federal, and Carolyn can speak very well, I'm sure, to the state and local aspect of this. And obviously, I think from our perspective, investors and businesses are going to continue to act and invest as well. But I think it's a real problem. It puts the US at a real economic disadvantage if we disengage from these international processes, because these other countries are moving ahead and seizing these economic opportunities, and we do not. The United States should not cede these economic opportunities for the industries of today and tomorrow, right? So we see China moving ahead, is decades ahead of us in EVs and solar and other industries. And we really need to continue our ambition and action and encourage investment in America to compete and win these industries of strategic importance.
Zack, Ceres, your organization, has issued a statement calling on President-elect Trump to reconsider some of what he has said in the past, to build on the momentum and, in some cases, bipartisan support for clean energy and other environmental policy. Tell us about the statement that your organization has released and its goals.
Over the past year, we've been building bipartisan support for continuing these incentives. Business and investors require certainty. Even the letter from 18 House Republicans that our businesses helped recruit members for, that really let the market and investors, especially international investors, breathe a sigh of relief that there is some certainty and bipartisan support and durability for these policies. So as we get into next year and the new Congress and administration take office, we're going to continue to engage and build support for continuing these policies and ensure that America wins the future. That's what this is about.
Zack, last question, and then let's go to you, Caroline, and hear about the local level. Is that one of the things that I know Ceres has worked on is the disclosure rules, making corporate action and corporate risks for climate more transparent. And it's something that has become political. And I know that companies and chief sustainability officers and their sustainability teams and their boards have all been navigating a really tricky landscape with European rules, California's rules, the SEC's rules, legal challenges to them. What do you expect to be the future of U.S. disclosure rules that create these sorts of expectations, reporting requirements for companies?
Good question. We've got other experts at Ceres working on financial regulatory policy. You said it right there. Other countries are acting and leading on this. Our businesses are going to have to and are ready, are reporting under foreign and state regimes. And the U.S. needs a seat at the table as we kind of harmonize all of these standards to just provide information to the market on material financial risk and opportunities, right? Investors are demanding and will not stop demanding material information on companies' risks and how they're seizing the economic opportunities. And having federal standard requirements is very important for investors and for our economic stability and certainty.
Thanks, Zack. Zack, we'll come back to you in a minute. Love to hear more. Carolyn, let's hear about what happened in the election at a more local level. And I think it's worth coming back and offering listeners a bit of a refresher on why state and local governments matter when it comes to climate policy. How much do they matter and what do they actually influence?
I think what we saw on Tuesday was a rapid decrease of climate ambition at the federal level. I don't think that anyone can argue with that. What we also know is that states have been the backbone of building the clean energy economy over the last few decades, and they will continue to do so. And in an era of a Trump presidency, states are critical and central to continuing to build out climate progress. I actually have a very personal story about this because I think sometimes this conversation can get very theoretical and it's hard to kind of parse out. States do this, the federal government does this because they're kind of overlapping sometimes. It gets complicated, but it doesn't have to be. Before I started Climate Cabinet, I worked in the solar industry and we built solar utility scale solar projects across the country. And my job as an analyst was to take hundreds of projects that we wanted to build and put them into one massive spreadsheet. And I did that. That was my job. I would call up the developers and ask them about the megawatt hours that their project would produce and like mega spreadsheet. And that really was about analyzing which states were we in and why. And I noticed something very interesting when I was there, which was that we as a company built over 60 solar projects in the state of Massachusetts and none in the state of Arizona. And that was all state policy. So we can talk theoretically about the role that different pieces of government have. But what I saw working at the solar company was the very real outcome of some of these policies and the fact that states are absolutely central to our ability to build the clean energy economy. And that's why I started Climate Cabinet, because I saw that and I asked myself, who are the people making these decisions and what does it take to get them to make a decision that actually favors climate progress?
Let's go deeper into that and hear a bit more about what is the work that your organization does, and specifically for the 2024 election, what were you focused on? What were your priorities?
So going into this entire year, and we've had elections all year, in addition to on Tuesday, we supported over 170 climate champions running across the country, all running at the state and local level. These were folks running for state legislatures, which pass 100% clean energy standards. They were running for city governments and county governments. They were running for public service commissioner races that actually manage, regulate the entire electricity system in some states. So that's 170 people running in some of the toughest races nationwide. We get involved in races when our process is Moneyball for climate politics. We find high ROI races across the country that have big climate impact. And they're kind of one of two things. They have big climate impact and they have a political window. So they need to be able to win. And every year we take a portfolio approach. So we make sure that folks have very different political windows available to them. And this year, it looks like we have over 50 candidates who've won in high impact races across the country, which is fantastic.
And were they candidates? It's exciting to hear that you consider them climate advocates. Is that part of what they're running on? Because it's interesting how at a national level, candidates do not campaign about being climate advocates. Locally, are they climate advocates, but they're really focused on other issues in their campaigning?
I would say that our strongest candidates are candidates who can speak to their constituents in a variety of different topics. So what we care about at Climate Cabinet is we call it votes, not vibes. I care about how those people vote when they're in office, not what they say on the campaign trail. We had a great candidate running in Pennsylvania, Mandy Steele, who won election on Tuesday, who's a clean energy champion and a champion of bringing in that economic base to her district. She ran against someone who kept posting on Facebook about how much he uses his reusable mug, but he had no plan for actually building the clean energy economy. He had no plan for actually solving climate change, for solving environmental issues. And so I don't care what people post on Facebook, I care how they vote. And that's fundamentally what we track is how do you vote when you're in office.
Great. And these 50 candidates are now elected officials. What do you expect they'll be able to do? You talked about the importance of state policy for solar development. What else are the priorities and the focus areas for these now elected officials?
I'd say with results on Tuesday, we have basically three categories of results. We have expanded climate opportunities, reduced climate opportunities, and we still have so many states that are still too close to call. We're recording this on Friday. So on expanded climate opportunities, in North Carolina, we expect the governor now has a veto pen. We broke a supermajority in North Carolina. That's going to give Josh Stein a lot more ability to take action on pollution, to take action on creating clean energy jobs, take action on solving climate change in North Carolina. So that's really exciting to us. Similar expanded authority in Wisconsin for the governor there, thanks to some state legislature flips, and also expanded authority in New Mexico, where climate champions ran the table in their primaries this year and then continued to win in the general election. And we're looking forward to their leadership next year. We had reduced, unfortunately, we did not win the Public Service Commission races this year. We were tracking the ones in Arizona and Montana, and lost seats in the Michigan House as well. And we have actually multiple states that are still too close to call at this point.
Okay, well, best of luck on those. Zach, Caroline, I suppose the question we're all really trying to understand is what happens now. Let's start by understanding how has the election changed your work and your priorities. Caroline, the election's finished. You were focused on an election. Kick us off. What are you focused on now? What comes next for your organization and your work?
Every single one of the candidates who won on Tuesday is a climate champion. And now our next goal is it's great that you won an election on a climate champion, but again, we're going votes, not vibes. So it's about connecting them with the resources they need to govern in a way that helps their constituents and brings people along in this clean energy transition. So we're calling it our policy success team. We have folks in states across the country. We're a national organization. And the role of our policy success team really is to connect those champions, not only with folks on our team, but also folks across the climate movement. We have so many great and talented people, all of our partners across the movement who can connect those climate champions with great, intelligent, common sense policy ideas. And that's what we're really looking for. So legislative session will start in about 4 weeks in many states, and we'll be there, and partners will be there. And it's about working together to help these champions draft and pass good climate policy.
Thanks, Caroline. Zack, what about you? What are your priorities now?
Yeah, I'll say three things with one kind of theme. We see clean energy and clean solutions as uplifting American workers, American farmers, American communities, strengthening manufacturing and jobs and our energy security. So we're going to continue mobilizing the business voice to support federal clean energy incentives and help companies tell their stories both publicly and privately on the investments they're making and the local economic benefits. Second, I think the President-elect Trump has made clear, both in his first term and on the campaign trail, that tariffs and trade policy, he's going to take a more aggressive approach there. We see and have been supporting carbon border adjustment, which has a tariff on imports of more emissions-intensive goods. I think there's been bipartisan support and even Republican leadership on that. It not only helps reduce global emissions, but strengthens American manufacturing. So I think when the Trump administration and Congress are considering trade policy and tariffs, there should really be an environmental performance and environmental outcomes considered there, because that really strengthens American manufacturing, American investment in these clean energy industries that are strategic industries with our competitors. And then third, Congress has been delayed in passing a farm bill. It's a huge bill and complicated, but there's really, America's farmers are leaders in environmental conservation and stewardship. We should continue to invest through the farm bill in rural communities and strengthening American farmers' leadership in clean agricultural production.
Well, great. I mean, for a candidate that ran on being good for business and good for rural communities, it sounds like a lot of opportunities to strengthen American competitiveness and support local communities by continuing the investments or accelerating investments that ultimately do have climate benefits. Zack, Caroline, I'm sure listeners also want to understand what this means for them and their efforts. Our audience are people who care about climates, are working in many different ways to address climate change. What should we be doing? What are the most important, impactful ways that we can stand up for climate progress in the wake of this election? Zack, let's start with you.
Sure. I think both publicly and privately telling folks, and especially from our side, business, whether that's a small business or a Fortune 500 business, to continue telling your story and talking about the economic benefits of the investments you're making in sustainability, both to the public, to your community, and to your lawmakers and policymakers at the federal, state, and local levels.
Thanks, Zack. Caroline, at a more local level, that's you. What should we be doing?
I think the climate community needs to really be thinking about rapidly expanded state capacity. We have to have two things in our head at the same time. We have to leave the door open for continued climate progress with folks who have not voted with us in the past and mostly have never voted with us in the past. Like, let's just be real about the folks who won on Tuesday. A lot of folks that we're tracking have 0% climate scores. And the second piece is we also have to be clear-eyed about the history here and where we have power to continue building clean energy jobs and solving climate change across the country. We have to live in kind of two headspaces at once. So when I'm thinking about kind of where do we have ability to keep pushing and to keep expanding, I'm really thinking about expanded state capacity right now. Right now, the Minnesota majority, pro-climate majority, they passed 100% clean last year, hangs on by about 13 votes. That's going to go to a recount in the next few weeks. But we do have opportunities, if that goes through, to continue moving on climate. And that's critical. Like Zack mentioned, that kind of re-up of tax code and that's upcoming. When I think about federal tax credits, like the tax credits for wind and solar and batteries, I think about the importance of the federal government there. But then if the state governments don't have any progress, you can't use a tax credit if the state won't let you build solar energy. You just can't do it. And that's what I saw when I was in the industry. We had federal tax credits, but if the state said no, the state said no, and we couldn't build anything in Arizona despite federal tax credits being there. So we really need to work on both levels of government to make sure that we continue our progress here. So if I'm thinking about this from a business lens, I'm thinking about Minnesota. I'm thinking about Michigan. Michigan past 100% clean as well, that's a place where we can keep building. Arizona's too close to call at this point. And I'm thinking about North Carolina. I'm thinking about Wisconsin. I'm thinking about New Mexico, all opportunities to keep progress going. And I think what Zack said also about some of the manufacturing that's already started, protecting that, making sure that's continuing to receive investment is critical right now. And I think there's a great case study. Like, I think it's extremely hard to go into community and say we're taking jobs away. I hope that's enough to keep us where we are.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Zack. Thanks for the work that you're doing. I'll add one more thing, which is we did a great episode before the election with the Environmental Voter Project, who highlighted how there are actually millions of people in the United States who list climate and the environment as their number one issue and then do not vote. Those are primarily young people, often people of color. And so over the next couple or 4 years, lots of opportunity to engage people in your networks who maybe aren't voting, but who do care about climate and do care about the environment, and help remind people of the importance of elections. Caroline, Zack, thank you again. Great to see you both.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Invested in Climate. Please remember to rate us on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Find show notes, sign up for updates, get in touch, and visualize your climate action at investedinclimate.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, accounting, or legal advice. Thanks again.